Once upon a time, there was a mother named Eleanor who dedicated every moment of her life to her family. She had a husband, Henry, and 2 children, Lily and Sam, who she loved fiercely. Eleanor was the kind of mother who woke up before dawn to prepare breakfast, who was always there for homework and bedtime stories, and who never took a day for herself. She wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, though a quiet yearning simmered beneath her selflessness, a wish for just a sliver of life that was her own. One chilly autumn evening, as Eleanor was cleaning out the attic, she came across an old, ornate mirror hidden beneath a dusty sheet. The frame was intricate, silver, and seemed to gleam even in the dim light. Something about it called to her, so she took a few hesitant steps forward, studying her reflection. She looked weary, her face framed by the soft, faded remnants of youth. As she stared, a quiet voice inside her whispered, "If only, just for a moment, I could know what it's like to be free. Free to live, free from responsibilities, to be alone, to just, to be." Unbeknownst to Eleanor, her words had woken something in the mirror. The mirror shimmered, casting an odd glow over her reflection, and an unsettling chill swept through the attic. The next morning, Eleanor awoke to an eerie silence. No giggles from her children down the hall, no familiar sounds of Henry preparing for work. The house was empty, eerily clean and organized, without a trace of the usual clutter that marked her life. Confused, Eleanor called out, her voice echoing back to her. "Lily? Sam? Henry?" Her calls were met with silence. Unease crawled over her, but as she moved around the empty house, something unexpected began to take root, a sense of freedom. She had the whole day to herself, free of obligations and duties. At first, she reveled in the quiet, taking long baths, reading books she'd never finished, and going for walks she'd always rushed through before. For once, Eleanor felt truly alive, like the world was hers alone. Days passed, and Eleanor reveled in this unexpected solitude. She spent hours wandering the city, visiting cafes, museums, and places she'd only dreamed of going. She began to dress more vibrantly, feel more confident, relishing in this newfound independence. Yet, despite the thrill, there was a nagging emptiness. One afternoon, as she sat in a quiet corner cafe, she caught sight of Henry, laughing with another woman. Her heart leaped, and she hurried outside, keeping her distance, observing as he walked hand in hand with the woman and 2 familiar children, Lily and Sam. Eleanor's heart clenched as she watched her children cling to this woman, as if she were their mother. The woman wore the dress Eleanor had planned to buy herself, her hair styled just as Eleanor had imagined. She looked like the version of herself Eleanor had dreamed of being. Eleanor's chest tightened, her pulse quickening with a strange blend of jealousy and fear. She stepped closer, calling Henry's name softly. He looked at her, his gaze blank, distant, as though she were a stranger. When she tried to reach out, he drew back, an apologetic smile on his face. "Do I know you?" he asked gently. The words pierced her, and in that moment, Eleanor realized the horrifying truth. This was her family, but to them, she was a ghost, a stranger in a life she had once known. Her wish had not given her freedom, it had erased her from their lives, leaving them to live a life without her, a life she had once longed for herself. Eleanor followed them, her mind racing, her breath shallow. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, her family, happily moving on as if she had never existed. They strolled through the park, playing games, laughing, completely at ease without her. As the days went on, Eleanor's obsession grew. She began to follow them everywhere, her every waking moment filled with haunting glimpses of the life that was once hers. She watched as Henry kissed this other woman, as Lily and Sam reached for her hand, as they sat together at dinner, laughing and telling stories as if Eleanor had never been there. In her desperation, Eleanor's behavior grew erratic. One night, as her family sat by the park, Eleanor lurked in the shadows, waiting until her children were momentarily left alone. She moved swiftly, snatching Lily and Sam, whispering frantically, "It's me, Mommy. Don't you remember me?" But they looked at her, wide-eyed with fear, unable to recognize her. The children screamed, drawing the attention of passers-by. She let them go, vanishing into the darkness before anyone could see her. But this encounter only deepened her resolve. That night, Eleanor wandered through the city until she found herself in front of her old home, staring at the life she'd lost. Inside, her family sat around a cozy fire, completely oblivious to her presence, looking perfectly content. Her eyes burned with anger and sorrow as she watched the woman, the new Eleanor, wrap her arms around Henry and kiss him tenderly. The sight sent Eleanor into a fit of jealousy. She clenched her fists, whispering to herself, "That's my life. You're living my life." Determined to reclaim her place, Eleanor waited until the new woman left the house alone one evening. She followed her down the dark, empty streets, her footsteps echoing in the night. Finally, she confronted the woman, her voice laced with bitterness and desperation. "You stole everything from me," she hissed, her eyes wild. "You're living my life. My family, my home, my happiness." The woman, startled, took a step back, fear flickering in her eyes. But Eleanor was relentless, her voice rising as she cried, "Give them back to me. They are mine." For a moment, Eleanor considered pushing her, grabbing her, making her disappear so that she could reclaim her family. But the woman's terrified expression broke something inside her. Realizing the depth of her despair, Eleanor stumbled back, her anger dissolving into hollow grief. She whispered, "Please. I just want my life back." Defeated, Eleanor turned and fled into the night, her heart heavy with regret. She was determined to make her mark this time. She had to strike again. Eleanor's heart raced as she pulled her children, Lily and Sam, into the shadows, clutching them close as if they were the lifeline to the world she'd lost. She'd waited, hidden, for hours until they were briefly out of sight, away from that woman, the one who had somehow stepped into her life. This was her another chance to reclaim them, to remind them who she was. But as she knelt down, trying to meet their eyes with a tender, trembling smile, she was met with wide-eyed terror. Sam whimpered, pressing himself back against the wall as if trying to escape her grasp. Lily clung to her brother, her face twisted with fear, her voice trembling. "Please, please let us go," Lily whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "We just want to go back to Mom and Dad." Eleanor's heart shattered at the words. Mom and Dad. The children she'd raised, who had once called her Mommy, now looked at her as though she were a stranger, something terrifying and unnatural. She reached out, her hand shaking, to reassure them, but they flinched, shrinking away. No, it's me, Mommy," Eleanor pleaded, her voice breaking. But their faces remained twisted in fear, their eyes filling with panic. You're a monster," Sam finally cried, burying his face in his sister's shoulder. "You're not our mom. Please, don't hurt us." The words cut through her like a knife, leaving her feeling hollow and broken. She released them, her hands falling to her sides as her own tears flowed freely. How could they not see? How could they forget her so completely? She watched as they stumbled back, running as fast as they could toward the familiar figure in the distance, the woman who had taken her place, who they now called Mom. But the desperation inside Eleanor didn't fade. It festered, growing darker and sharper. "You again," the other woman said. "What do you want?" She confronted the woman who had stolen her family, her life. With anger and despair burning in her eyes, Eleanor shouted at her, "You took everything from me. You're living my life." The woman's fearful expression and her quiet, pleading words to stay calm only enraged Eleanor further. But soon, flashing lights and sirens interrupted the scene, and police officers pulled Eleanor away, her wrists bound as she cried and fought to break free. Arrested and locked away, Eleanor sat alone, the crushing weight of her sorrow turning into a quiet, desperate resolve. Somehow, she managed to escape her cell, slipping into the night, a shadow determined to reclaim what she had lost, no matter the cost. As days blurred into nights, Eleanor grew more desolate, her face hollow, her once bright eyes now dark and lifeless. She roamed the city like a ghost, watching from the shadows as her family continued to live on, happy and whole without her. Her heart ached as she saw the children growing, Henry smiling, the woman who had taken her place flourishing in the life that Eleanor had once cherished. Desperate for a way out of this nightmare, Eleanor finally returned to the attic, to the cursed mirror that had granted her wish. She stared at her reflection, her face now a haunting shadow of the woman she had once been. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. I want my family back. Please, let me have them back." But the mirror remained silent, her reflection staring back at her with an unyielding sadness. It seemed to mock her, reflecting the consequences of her careless wish. The mirror remained silent, her reflection staring back at her with a mocking sadness. It seemed to say, "Be careful what you wish for." Now, Eleanor roams her old home, a ghost forever trapped between two worlds, watching the life she once knew drift further away. Her family lives on, oblivious to her sorrow, while the mirror sits in the attic, waiting for the next soul who dares to make a wish.